Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flourish in the Foreign. On YouTube, you're watching this, or on Instagram. Today, we have a very special guest, and we are actually going to be talking about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while: intergenerational mobility. For those of you that are new to Flourish in the Foreign, Flourish in the Foreign is a weekly personal narrative podcast that elevates and affirms the voices and stories of Black women living and thriving abroad. And also, the podcast explores living abroad as a pathway to wellness. Okay. So today we have Tiffany Smith, who is an exceptional researcher, educator, and podcaster herself. Check out Abroad in Education. We're going to talk about intergenerational mobility. Why, you may want to know? Well, you're going to find out why. Because I think it's interesting. That's why, basically. It's important to talk about the so many layers to moving abroad, wanting to move abroad, making a life abroad. It's not just, I'm sick and tired of this country, let's get out. It's layers to it. And there's layers to why you may even feel that way in the first place. So let us get started. Tiffany, hello. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello, hello.
Okay, so Tiffany, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about the research that you're doing for your dissertation.
Yeah. So, first, thank you so much for allowing me to come on your platform. I am so excited. I'm like, we're going to make it work. Hi, everybody. My name is Tiffany Lachelle, and I'm the host and creator of Abroad in Education. So, I like to start with a podcast because my podcast actually stemmed from my dissertation research, which examines African American K through 12 teachers who left the U.S. to come and teach in the UAE. And the UAE is pretty much a case study. So basically, what I'm doing with this study is unpacking the lives of folks who decided to leave. So, what was their experience in K through 12, their childhood, parents, all that stuff. So the study and the podcast stems from my own lived experience. I am a teacher. I taught in the States for 2 years. I'm from Illinois. And then I left Illinois and I went to teach in Casablanca, Morocco for 2 years. And then I taught here in the UAE in Abu Dhabi for 2.5 years. So woke up one day, getting ready to be 30, decided that at that point it was time to make some changes. I felt like, I'm not married. I don't have any kids. I'm out here playing, all these yacht parties, it's time to get serious about life. So at that point, I applied for my PhD program, which I was accepted at the University of Minnesota. And currently, I'm a fifth-year doctoral student with plans to graduate May 2020. I'm sorry, May 2021. 2021, yes.
All right, so let's get into it. Tell us about this concept of intergenerational mobility. And what does that mean?
Yeah. So intergenerational mobility is actually stemming as a theme from this from the research. And basically what I'm finding is so when I'm trying to make this comparison, right? What is their experiences in the UAE and what is their experiences in the US? And of course, talking about teaching in K through 12 schools or admin or counselors, whatever their position is. So as I'm unpacking these life histories, I realize that where they are right now is not the story. It's really unpacking where they came from. So a prime example would be one of my life historians, Melanie, who came from I would say lower SES family, first generation college student, studied abroad, all of these different things that impacted her decision to come here. But then when you look at her family, it's like she was pretty much being conditioned to be a, strong Black woman, educated, self-sufficient, take care of yourself. And one of the things that happened in her life history was because she's trying to live up to this narrative, she ended up sacrificing her marriage. So she has this imagination of what living abroad, creating this life abroad is going to be like. But what it ended up being is a whole different narrative, I'll say. So intergenerational mobility is basically a theory where you can compare, this life history to, what was their parents, what was their grandparents, and was there any upward mobility? So you can look at it through, someone's salary. You can look at it through education. You can look at it through many different like societal factors. But what I'm also realizing, which I think is my contribution to this work, is stories are even intergenerational, and how we end up living out our lives. One of the one of the mantras of the Black community is, go to school so you can get a good job, which is the mantra, that I grew up on. But when it came to getting a good job in American society, that narrative didn't pan out, right? So that intergenerational mobility of get the job, upward mobility, you'll be great. And what happened was I went through higher ed, graduated with so much debt, going into the teaching profession, 35 a year. I'm at home in my previous childhood bedroom. So these intergenerational stories that are passed, sometimes it looks different. It looks completely different. So yeah, that's where I'm kind of hitting with this intergenerational mobility.
This is so interesting because, like you said, our story doesn't begin with us,
Yeah.
or and it definitely doesn't start with whenever we decide to make a mobility kind of endeavor, right? It's not like, oh, okay, I decided to move abroad and that's when the story began. I think I agree with you so much. We really need to unpack that. So tell me, right now we're in this, I don't know, this excitement, this resurgence, right? Because nothing is original, of this, quote unquote, Black exodus. I don't know how much of an exodus it is, but, um, this Blackzit movement. People are like, I'm getting out of the US and da 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 da. So tell me, how does intergenerational mobility fit into kind of that concept as you see it?
Yeah. And I think so. This is where I'm being challenged as well, because one of the things that I realize, and especially with this whole conversation about Blackset, I do realize that what we're doing is contemporary, right? I think the factors that are impacting why we do it, right? This access to technology, being able to look at people's social media pages. You got folks that go ahead and they're sending these messages back like, oh, it's safe, come on. And then 5 people will come, right? Or 10 people, or, thousands of people. I don't know. I mean, the numbers are always questionable. But I don't think that intergenerational mobility could explain that. And that's what I'm really kind of challenging myself to think about as well, because when I think about intra-generational mobility and these stories within stories, so if we think about like this contemporary, oh yeah, everybody's just going to leave the States and move abroad and be entrepreneurs or solopreneurs or digital nomads. It's the same story as James Baldwin, right? Who left the States because of this. And then he was abroad as a writer. And, his writing is what connected him to keep coming back to the States. But it really is the factors that are different. Like let me be mindful about how I say it. It's the same factors that are pushing us out, which is the racism, all of the American isms, especially being a Black person in the States. But the experiences lived abroad is different, right? So now we're talking about things like American passport privilege, blue passport privilege, right? We're talking about everybody's Blackness isn't privileged. We're talking about what does it mean to be an American abroad. So I definitely think there is space to really not only unpack the stories from history, because James, and I hate to say it, James Baldwin, your Nina Simone's, your Josephine Baker's, we have these very traditional icons that we look like as far as Black expats, but we really haven't uncovered all of the stories. And when you start to look at that research, it's like, you have folks in the antebellum period getting invited over to Europe, for a peace conference. And some of the emotional narrative is, oh, I feel so free. I feel like a man here. I feel like a woman. And I'm like, but if they were saying that then, which is very similar to what's being said now, it's not even limited to our intergeneration, my parents and my grandparents. It's bigger than that. So it's a lot of unpacking that can be done. And this is the work that I'm being challenged to do. But I'm so fascinated by it all.
I am as well. I think this is such a fascinating topic because, as you said, this is something that continues to be echoed, right? So, throughout history, I actually just listened to This American Life, which is a podcast. They had a rerun of a podcast called Americans in Paris. And one of the acts was talking to a Black American woman who was in Paris, and she goes into everything that she feels when she is in Paris. And it's the exact same. I think this was recorded in 2000. This is
Mm.
what the things that you're talking about from the people who went to Europe in the antebellum or James Baldwin. These exact same emotions, and it's just fascinating. It's really, really fascinating. I would love for you to speak a little bit more on James Baldwin because I think what also happens is that sometimes sometimes we just don't go deep enough. It's like very shallow, right? And so we say James Baldwin, Nina Simone, Josephine Baker, these are Black expats, But, in a conversation that we've had before, you mentioned that James Baldwin didn't feel like an expat, right?
Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah, right. Like what? Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, James Baldwin never considered himself an expat. And I think once he started to get a lot of press and, invited to do these talks, right? He was talking about race relations in America completely different from some of the other researchers that were talking about race relations. So I was actually reading Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, and then she touched on it again in Cast. But it's this whole notion. There's a scholar, Dollard, and he wrote a lot of his writing was from 1935, Caste, Class in a Southern Town or something like that. And he's talking about this notion of expressions of discontent. So he's talking about the ways that Black folks, who are on these plantations can express discontent because they don't have autonomy. They don't have a lot of power. So, they're doing these different like social behaviors as expressions of discontent. So it could be, gossiping about the folks that, the homes that they're cleaning, like, such and such is a drunk and, he cheating on his wife, right? This is their power to express discontent. It could be something as simple as, if they go into a store, choosing where they want to patron, go into a store. If a Black woman is approached by a white store owner, hey, because he said that like the way that Black folks connected with each other would be like auntie, right? Very like African culture, or sister, right? This is how they connected with each other in the church. So if a white woman approached a Black woman like, hey, auntie, the Black woman would walk her out. I'm not your auntie. You approach me like you expect me to approach you. So, this is how they can choose where they're gonna shop. So it's this whole like expression of discontent. And Dollard said the largest expression that one could use as far as power is to leave. The mobility of their bodies, they leave. And that's when you're looking at this large influx of Black folks leaving the South and going to the North. Like that's the last thing they can do. So James Baldwin is kind of touching on this same thing where he's like, well, why are we as Black folks going and investigating Black folks and basically giving out all of our secrets? He's like, if we're going to talk about it, we have to talk about it in a new way. So for James Baldwin, he, is outside of the States looking back in. So this whole thing with rejecting an expat, he's like, I'm not an expat because I'm still very much connected to America. He's like, I may be in Turkey, I may be in Paris, I may be in all these other places, but I'm very much connected. So he said the danger of being an expatriate is that, you essentially find yourself belonging nowhere. So he can't, and he's explaining this, I'm in Turkey, but I can't be responsible for the Turkish government. I can't be responsible for the Turkish citizens. I'm here. So he describes himself as a transatlantic commuter, kind of going back and forth. So, he made, and that's what he said. He said he went to Turkey because he wanted to write and he couldn't write in peace in the States. So he had to leave the country, one, so that he can even have something to compare the States to. He's like, if you're in the States, all you have to compare the States to is America. Like that's your only comparison. But he says, when you're outside of the States, you have all of these different ways of comparing, race, gender, all these oppressions. And pretty much for him, it was that same thing with Dollard. It's that geographic mobility. I can move my body and, change this whole experience. But leaving is dangerous too. I think leaving all the time is dangerous, which is why I question that whole Blacksit thing. Like, if we just keep leaving and we're not making anything happen, I think that's dangerous as well.
Talk more about that. Why do you think it's dangerous? Because I know, some of the argument is like, if we all leave, America will crumble, and she will see the error of her ways. And for me, I'm like, I don't know if America will ever see the error of her ways. Like, I don't know if it's ever going to happen. Do I think America is severely stunted without Black people's um, physical, tangible labor and emotional labor? Yes, I think that's no doubt. But um, will there be a reckoning? I don't know if there will ever be a reckoning in the United States.
Well, when I think about the notion of leaving, I'll be honest, I'm not even thinking about America, right? I'm thinking about the person. And
Okay.
for me, this is a life lesson that I'm experiencing now. And I think you'll find it interesting because it actually connects with wellness. But essentially, if you see leaving as your go-to, and it goes back to this expressions of discontent. If you see leaving as your only option to express discontent, it becomes a routine, right? So in my lived experience, I would say, when I was upset teaching in the K through 12 system, I left, right? And I didn't leave the profession. I didn't leave the school and go to another. I left the country. So that was my first leaving. And luckily going to a country where I was able to, have that James Baldwin experience, which I'd studied abroad before. So it wasn't like, that was my first time abroad. But I left, had this whole experience. And then when Casablanca got hard, because Casablanca is not the easiest country. And when I got tired of it, what did I do? I left, right? So now I find myself in Abu Dhabi. And every time you leave, you're starting from the ground up. You're starting over. So when I'm in Abu Dhabi, I'm discontent, I'm getting older. I'm not happy with my relationship status. I feel actually, it was my best year in my teaching career. And, I don't know what to do. So what do? I left, I go back home, I'm doing this thing. I'm upset with my family. I'm not happy here. I have this global life. What did I do? I left. So when you continue to leave, I think what it does is it really prevents an actual solution, right? It's like that go to, I'm going to avoid feeling this. I'm going to avoid unpacking this. I'm going to avoid like even activism, doing like gathering and doing something about this issue. Leaving is dangerous in my mind because if we all leave America, yes, America will suffer. But at the same time, like when I hear about people renouncing their citizenship, if you are an American in any country, it carries a different weight. But when you show up as a local in that country, it carries a different weight, which is not as heavy as the American weight. So I don't know what activism looks like unless you're on that American passport. And much of the activism is for the states, not for that country. So it's just complex. It's very complex. But if we just keep leaving like, oh, we're just going to escape and go live somewhere else happy, I think if we continue to do that, it could be dangerous in the future.
Look, Miss Ma'am, you just read me. You literally just read me to filth. It's not about me today, but you just read. I want to touch on something else that I think James Baldwin, Josephine Baker, and Nina Simone have also experienced when they were abroad. Something that I also try to center the podcast around, which is wellness, right?
Yeah,
Professional, financial wellness, um, mental and physical wellness as well, being abroad. Could you speak a little bit about that and maybe your thoughts on how intergenerational mobility has, in my mind at least, been somewhat focused on the aspiration of a well life, a life well lived, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the benefits that we have, and I would say particular to this generation, is our aspirations are global, like our parents, and I would even say our grandparents, their aspiration was education, upward mobility in American society. Their aspirations were like very, very limited because it wasn't a lot of other stories. It wasn't a lot of other examples. And even for James Baldwin, I think his era was it's during the time when folks are actually being exiled out of the states. It's a lot of political things happening with Black leaders getting assassinated, killed, and James Baldwin. That's why his story is amazing, because with his activism being outside of the states, he and Nina Simone, that's when they became best friends. It was almost like, yeah, we have to do this from a distance because it's too dangerous to do it in the States. So for them, I don't know. Nina Simone's story is very interesting to me because when she decided to leave the States, it was financial issues. And she had this amazing career. And in her autobiography, she's talking about how she couldn't pay taxes. It was like tax stuff that she was losing her house, losing everything. And she had her daughter. So she ended up going, I want to say she went to Liberia first. I may be skipping a country, but in Liberia, she was appreciated in ways that she had not been appreciated in the States. So it wasn't like she had to live on the laurels of being like a famous, singer, musician. It was more like, okay, we know her. But she was saying, like, I could walk the streets and not be bothered. My daughter was fine. It was just like a different place where she didn't have to worry about performing, whether it's performing walking on the street or performing on the stage. So because of her name, she did not engage with like regular Liberians. She engaged with the elite to the point where she was, possibly going to marry this man who was courting her. But when she decided to leave Liberia, because this is when she was able to get out of that depression, show up as a different person, she's writing about being so much embodied with this spirit that she's in a nightclub. And when she comes to, she's naked, right? She's dancing, taking her clothes off. And when she finally comes to, she's completely naked. And I'm like, wow, that's like a shedding, right? You're shedding all of that baggage that you were carrying from the States. So when she decided to leave, it was because she wanted her daughter to be educated. The education system, Liberia couldn't offer it to her daughter. So she went to Switzerland and she enrolled her daughter in school there. So it definitely is a lot of that well-being. But I don't know, because I was actually listening to one of your IG videos the other night, and you all were talking about pretty much a broad well-being is still a choice. It really is still a choice. And it's that work of, I'm thinking about that the year when I decided, okay, it's time to go home, I was also going through a depression. And it's like when you lose your purpose or you don't have a purpose, you're just kind of living day to day. I feel like now there's different things that you can do to address it, which is why I say leaving can be dangerous. But when she was in Switzerland, when Nina Moan was in Switzerland, she fell into a depression again. So yeah, it's interesting, which is why I say I think looking at these life histories and looking at these stories, really it can provide us with tools and resources for what we're doing now. We're not starting from scratch, so we don't have to recreate the wheel. It's, well, what did these other folks do?
I think that is, I mean, everything you've been saying is just profound and so freaking interesting. Um, Especially, what you said a couple minutes ago, you said, what James Baldwin, Nina Simone felt is that it was too dangerous to be the kind of to engage in the kind of activism they wanted to do in the United States, so they need to be abroad, which I think is an interesting subject for now, because I have interviewed several people about how they are relating to the politics of the United States. Are they completely disconnected? Are they still very engaged? And what I think the overall um, sentiment is that, for Black people, we're just like, we're always going to be Black, and it's always going to be very much affecting us, especially if you have family still in your home country. And although we can choose not to be bombarded by like the 24-hour news cycle kind of thing that's in the United States with cable television, we're still very much connected. And something else that's come up is that there is this feeling of guilt
Yeah,
for being away, although you're still very much engaged and hopeful in whatever your activism may be looking like, whether it be more grassroots and more familiar, I don't know. There's still this survivor's guilt.
exactly.
And it is very, very fascinating. I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts or feelings on that? This survivor's guilt? Has anyone that you've researched, have they discussed anything like that?
Well, I honestly think that's the work. And there's one young woman who comes to mind, Marilyn Shane. She wrote a blog post about it was like something about being abroad and watching your country burn. So she's talking about her experience being here in the UAE. And then this is during the time when all of the protests went global because of George Floyd's murder. So I do think about her a lot because, one of the things, and I guess there were some other blog posts that had come before her as well. But one of the things that she was saying is, the UAE in itself is a place where public protests are illegal. And, if you go through the right steps, there are places and certain certain leaders that will work with you to organize those things. But other than that, like, you're very limited here. And when I read her blog and then some other blogs, they were basically talking about, their only solution was to invest in Black businesses. And I'm like, ooh, that's hard. Because if the only activism, and maybe this is the epitome of this generation, like all we think about is consumption, like money, like exchange of money, that our imaginations are limited to, oh, well, activism is spending money, And I'm thinking, James Baldwin, I think this is the time, which is why the concept of intergenerational mobility, and I have to say that does not belong to me. It is a theory. Spavak, some folks in comparative ed, so that does not belong to me. But it makes me think about James Baldwin in this intergenerational mobility, because I think writing is activism. I think blogging is activism. Podcasting is activism, right? We're not only sharing our own stories, we're handing the mic to other folks for them to share their stories. And what that does is documents and archives our life histories, not only for our generation, but also for the generations to come. Right. So when I'm talking about this notion of intergenerational mobility, it's like, well, how do you even start that work? Like, what are some processes that you can take yourself through to start questioning, who am I? Whose am I? What family, who is my family? Unpacking these bigger things. And then when it comes to, I think it's creating the value in ourselves, then that's when that activism work comes, like, you know what? America is mine because my family's there, because my nieces and nephews are there, So me sitting here, resting on my laurels because I'm on the 10th floor, overlooking this beautiful landscape. I'm not detached. I'm not dismissed. I'm very much connected. And kind of extending James Baldwin's idea about being a transatlantic commuter. I'm like, yeah, and now we're transnational commuters. Right? We're not only comparing our lived experiences to Europe, we're, all over the globe. And what does it feel like to be conditioned as a Black American living in those spaces? And it's not a call to leave the States. Come on, y'all. It's not a call to leave the States. It's a call to say, so these feelings are real. And how come I had to leave the States to get it? How come I can't feel these feelings in the States? And I think that's when the activism comes. What can we do, so that this euphoric feeling that we're feeling in other countries, so that we can feel it in the States?
Mm, so much there. There's so much. I mean, first, the first notion being the only activism that we can do is by paying and patronizing Black-owned businesses, which I think is such an interesting and insidious mindset that as Black Americans we take around the world, which is hyper-capitalism.
Mm.
And we take it all around the world. I know I have been guilty of being an ugly American here in Spain with that mentality.
Mm.
Nothing to do with language or other kinds of things, which you'd be like, oh, as a Black American, we've learned how to accommodate and to assimilate and to kind of morph from situation to situation. But the expectation that the dollar or the euro, whatever, is the almighty thing. And why are you not jumping up and down for this? I got it. Don't you want it? That is, I think, something we have to be very careful about,
Yeah.
because it's something that I had to check myself hard. And it was like, it was the conversation of like, well, I mean, y'all don't like to make money. Like, what's going on? Da, 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 da. And it's like there are more important things than money and
Amen.
time, and cannot be bought. That's
Amen. Yeah.
here in Spain when people are like, no, I'm gonna put up this piece of notebook paper and the rest of the day off because I'm tired. Like that's you're like, you upload this to Google Maps. How am I supposed to know that you didn't put out on social media? And they're like, because I don't need to. Right?
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think it's so important for us to be very careful about, because I think it's insidious. Because I don't think as Black Americans, I don't think we don't see capitalism as bad. And
Exactly.
we go to other places and we see the effects. It's not saying capitalism is the worst. It's just you see the effects and the mentality and how you relate to other people when you're coming from a hyper capitalist society.
I
Um,
agree.
it's dangerous because we think that we gotta shuck and jive for every single thing, in which other countries provide freely for their citizens because they want their citizens to do well. Um,
Exactly.
and so how the citizens relate to each other is different than how Americans relate to each other. Um, I think that's so profound. That could be a whole discussion in and of itself. Oh my,
Yeah.
oh my.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned, you know, how can we start doing the unpacking? How can we start understanding who we are and, as you said, whose we are? How can we start doing that?
Yeah. I think it's a great question, one, and it's very much connected to the work that I'm doing. I'm sitting here like, how you know your work good?
Come on, step.
Right. No, I think one of the ways, and at least this is what I have done. One of the beautiful things about life history research is I get this privileged, I get to sit in this privileged position where all I have to do is ask questions to someone and kind of probe them to unpack their life. And in my mind, right, this is just me. This is the nerd in me. I love hearing people's stories. So this is fun to me. This is absolutely amazing to me. But what I find out, and I guess it's in my research and then it's also in the podcasting too. I always say the best part of the conversation is when the record button stops, because there's so much stuff that, kind of comes out. And it's always that, wow, I haven't thought about this in a long time. Or, wow, you're bringing up, so many memories that I haven't even, dipped in for years, or I couldn't say this because, this, and this. So, what I did, especially in my study, to get folks to start unpacking their lives, because many of us get so caught up in the day to day, we don't get a chance to sit back and reflect, which I think, even the privilege to reflect is the epitome of well-being, right? To appreciate and meditate on your life. So the first thing that I did with my life historians is I had them create a linear life timeline. And basically, with this linear life timeline, you are starting with the year of birth, and then you're, going linear and just saying, for me, I'm born in 86. So 86, 87, 88, 89. And I'll be honest, my life is in school years. My life functions in school years as a teacher. So mine is like 86, 87, 87, 88, 88, 89, in school years. So what I encourage, what I'm encouraging people to do is, kind of putting down the years of your life and thinking about, what were some of the milestones that were happening there? So, just a table, you have your rows, you have your columns. How old were you? What grade were you in? And then what was the milestone? So like one milestone that comes to mind for me is when I was in fourth grade, I ended up changing schools in the middle of the school year because we left the projects and my mom, bought a house. So when we left the projects and moved into another house, I went to a different school. But at the same time, I am, in this classroom. I have the same last name as the teacher, Miss Smith, and she became my lifelong friend and still is. But when I think about that neighborhood that we moved into, right, everybody talks about like redlining and zoning and, all this white flight, like it's historic. White flight happened on the street that we moved on. When we moved into that house, we had white neighbors, it was pretty diverse. Within that next year, all the white folks were gone. And I was like, white flight is not historic. I experienced that. It was that lady across the street, her daughter over here, a couple over here, they were gone by that next year. So these are the things that I'm unpacking in my life. Just through this linear life timeline. When did you go to college? What was that? And you're just kind of making notes of it. So I say start with that, just starting with your own life history. And the linear life timeline is basically a way to organize those things. What are some of those meaningful events that just come to memory without even trying? So that's where I would, suggest folks to start just with that small thing.
I think that is wonderful. Tiffany, we could talk about this for hours because I just think this is something that one is not spoken about at all in this greater Blaxit movement, or I think for seasoned expats, I don't think people really talk about this, and I think this is really important for us as a people, and I'll say specifically Black Americans, to really reflect and to make connections and to be intentional and to really understand where is this coming from, who am I, and what are these motivations, right? I think it's so fascinating. I think we could talk about this forever. um, I'm expecting a book, so that just gonna put that on top of all the other stuff
Yeah.
doing. Tell us, where can we find you? Where can we find more resources to learn about this as well?
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited. So I hope that your audience, the people who are listening to your podcast, I really hope that you all are inspired by some of the things that I'm saying, and just some of the ideas that I'm bringing to the forefront. And one of the things that I would love for you to do is look at this linear life timeline that I've started. So what I've done already, if you're interested in connecting with me, you can go to abroad_in_ed. And in my bio, I have put a link so that you all can kind of sign in and get connected to the linear life timeline.
Amazing. Okay, so y'all go to her Instagram in the bio part of the Instagram. There's a link where you can get that. I think we all got to do it. I think it's part of that reflection, and I think 2020 is a year of reflection, y'all. Like
Amen.
we've
Yes.
been in timeout, and we needed it. Um, and we're here in December. It's time to do some deep reflection. Not just did I hit my goals or not. Let's go a little bit deeper. So all of y'all, please go and get that linear life timeline and let's talk about it. If you guys do it, I mean, comment. And if you guys want, I mean, we could have another chat. I don't know. Let's keep it open. Um, and obviously, go check out Tiffany's podcast, Abroad in Education. Such a wonderful resource. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for this conversation. I just appreciate you. I appreciate it. We have some
Thank
technical
you.
difficulties again. But we got it done. We got it done. So just thank you so much for sharing your research and your insights because I just think they're so, so necessary. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. That is it for Florida. Either you're seeing this on Instagram or YouTube. Be sure to go to the website, www.flourishingtheforeign.com. Listen to the podcast and support the podcast. If you love it, support the podcast. There are 6 different ways for you to support the podcast. You can become a Patreon. You can cash out the podcast. You can purchase something off our Amazon wish list. Share with your social media friends. Subscribe and rate and leave a review for the podcast as well. All right, until next time, see you later. Bye.